Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Who's the worst quarterback a NFL team has been able to successfully build around? And when I say build around, I mean like build sustainable success that put them in legitimate championship contention. We're talking about making a Super Bowl, maybe winning a Super Bowl, or getting to multiple conference championship games. That level of success, that level of a run, a level of success that would be unprecedented for the new incarnation of the Cleveland Browns. Who is the worst quarterback that the NFL team has decided we're going to build around you and have had that with, right? And again, when I say build around, I'm not talking about they just sign somebody randomly, he takes the job and it works out. I'm talking about they made a conscious effort to build around the skill set of this player over a period of time, and this is what they were able to get out of that era with. You know, what's the best example, the worst quarterback you can find that a team has been able to successfully build around? It's an interesting question to ask about the NFL at any time, right? It's an interesting question to ask now as the Browns are asking themselves whether they should build around this guy or that guy or this guy or that guy, right? But who's the worst quarterback that we've seen a team successfully build around? I asked this question on social media and I got a ton of interesting answers. So what I want to do today is just go over some of the answers that I got on social media when I asked this question. But before I get into that, got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. All right, so I asked this question on social media. I got a lot of interesting responses. Let's go through these responses. The first thing I noticed was that there was a ton of people telling me it's Troy Aikman. Like a lot of responses. I think this thing got like over 100 replies. And like legitimately, I think 20 of these replies are Troy Aikman. I have to be fair here because I did not grow up during the Troy Aikman era. I was born in 1995. I am entirely too young to judge Troy Aikman as a quarterback. Those of you who were there, if this is what y'all doing, I think that's interesting, right? I don't know what to say about it. I know Troy Aikman had a lot of Hall of Fame help, right? Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin off the top of my head. Like those Cowboys teams were clearly very, very good. I don't know what people in his day thought of Troy Aikman, though. Like, was he thought of as kind of like an Andy Dalton? He's not that good. And then he got help around him, or was this like a Joe Burrow situation where everybody thinks he's good and he has the help? I don't know how to judge the Troy Aikman thing. And I don't know if this Troy Aikman stuff is coming from people who watched Troy Aikman play or did not watch Troy Aikman play. Y'all who watched Troy Aikman, right, and had legitimate opinions during Troy Aikman's pro career, have that debate in the comment section. I have no idea what to do with this, but like outside of Trent Dilfer, this was like the number one fucking answer. I don't know why it was the number one answer, but a lot of people saw this prompt and said Troy Aikman. Maybe that's like an anti-Cowboys thing, but I thought that was interesting because I didn't expect that. This was an interesting answer. I think the 2015 version of Peyton Manning might be the worst quarterback to win a Super Bowl. He was awful. Now, this is an interesting one because you got to ask yourself, does it qualify, right? The Broncos built around Peyton Manning, but the 2015 version was the last of Peyton Manning. It wasn't necessarily the Peyton Manning that they decided to build around, right? If they had signed him in 2015 and then built around him, I think that would be more fitting. But you were able to elevate a Peyton Manning who was not very good at that point in his career. And you want to see something funny? Go look at Peyton Manning's stats both the years he went to Super Bowl. Those are like, he was awful both seasons, both playoffs that he won a Super Bowl. I think he had like a negative touchdown interception ratio in the playoffs in the first Super Bowl he won. And I think he was just pretty mediocre in 2015. I don't think he was negative in touchdown interception, but pretty mediocre in 2015. I remember watching that one vividly. I don't think he fits as like the worst quarterback that somebody has successfully built around, because again, the Peyton Manning that core of that roster was built around was still an MVP winner, right? Like it was still the passing leader, still really good version of Peyton Manning. The remnants of that team and the defense that was created during that run is what eventually ended up carrying Peyton Manning to a championship. But it's not like they decided to build around that specific version of him. Now, that Broncos team that decided to build around Brock Osweiler, that was a pretty bad quarterback that they built around, but it wasn't a successful build, right? Like it was just a decision to do it. Cleveland SPA said Blaine Gabbert had a 10-year career and he started 49 games. I would simply argue that that is true, but he is not a successful example, right? Again, I'm looking for the worst QB that an NFL team has built around successfully, right? We're talking about real success. From what I remember of Blaine Gabbert's career, there was not a sustained period of real success. To answer a lot of people's questions, right? Because I think people will initially default to saying Trent Dilfer, because I think people are answering the question of who's the worst quarterback to win a Super Bowl and not answering the question that I'm actually answering. And this is a answer to that, right? Do we count 2000 Trent Dilfer winning a Super Bowl? Shout out to D-Lit for asking, or D-Lit Exchange Jackson for asking this question, because I think it needed to be clarified. Not really. He kind of just took Tony Brown's job in 2000. Like the Ravens never intentionally built around Trent Dilfer. Again, I think that's another part of it, right? It has to kind of be intentional that a team is like, okay, this is who we have at quarterback. We're going to make the most out of that at quarterback. I think that's probably why Troy Aikman pops up so much, because again, that's just somebody that they were intentional about building around. I thought I got a couple of really good answers here from Chris. Chris says this. Damn, this is a good question. If we're talking about a team that drafted and then built around them, I'm thinking Rex Grossman or maybe Mark Sanchez. If we can count free agents, thinking Kerry Collins. I don't think the level of success for Kerry Collins was there, but the level of success for Rex Grossman is there. And the level of success with Mark Sanchez is there. People forget, but I believe the Jets went to 2 back-to-back conference championship games with Mark Sanchez. Now, obviously, that team was carried by a defense that was already there when Mark got there. So it's a question of like, did they actually build around Mark Sanchez, or was Mark Sanchez kind of thrown into a complete build? That's fair enough, but I do think there's enough parallels for Mark Sanchez in his situation, in Cleveland's situation right now, that you can maybe draw some valid parallels there. Rex Grossman is another one. Wasn't very good. I do believe that the Bears made more of a conscious effort to build around Rex Grossman. Maybe this is just like my childhood distorting how I remember things. But I remember Rex Grossman being the quarterback for the Bears for a significantly extended period of time here. So maybe I'm wrong here, because it looks like he only got that one season in 2006 where he was the starter. And then he started again for Washington in 2011. So maybe that's not the example I thought it was. Again, this is where being 2006, I was 11 at the time. kind of distorts your memory of it because you think that, oh, because he's starting in the Super Bowl, he's playing a ton, but not. He had 6-8 career starts up to that point. So if we look at Mark Sanchez, I think he fits that description far more. Yeah, he fits that description way more than Rex Grossman. The other question becomes this with Mark, right? Well, what years did they make the playoffs with Mark? So 09 and 2010, they made the playoffs and they got to the conference championship game. Those are his first 2 years. 2011 and 2012, you can make the argument. Well, I would say 2010, you can make the definitive argument that in 2010, they built around Mark Sanchez. And everything that they did from 2010 on was built around Mark Sanchez. So I would say there's an argument there for Mark Sanchez. Now that I thought about that and looked up some data, I think there's a legitimate argument that Mark Sanchez might be the worst quarterback a team has ever successfully built around. Justin reinforces that point. Mark Sanchez, and as a Michigan native, I hate to say it, but Jared Goff. Man, Jared Goff gets a lot of flack, but like if we're comparing Jared Goff to Mark Sanchez, it's not even close how much better Jared Goff is at every point of his career than Mark Sanchez, right? Like, am I wrong about that? I don't think I'm wrong about that. I feel like Jared Goff is not as appealing when you compare him to elite quarterbacks, but when you compare him to like Mark Sanchez, he is so much better than those guys. I think Jared Goff is just, he suffers from being, he's like that new class of quarterback of the Kirk Cousins type, right? Where it's like he's just good enough to make a ton of money in the NFL, but he never wins big games. And that ends up being a problem for you, right? Like you feel like you can't win a championship with Jared Goff, which ends up being a problem. Hen Dog says Jalen Hurts for one. Now, Jalen Hurts is a much better quarterback than Mark Sanchez. I think we'll all agree on that. Even if you're the biggest Jalen Hurts hater in the world, you can't possibly think that he's not better than Mark Sanchez. But the question is like, does the level of success that Jalen Hurts has reached as a quarterback versus, I think this is the Troy Aikman argument from what I can guess, right? Because I imagine a lot of the Troy Aikman stuff is going to sound like Jalen Hurts stuff, where it's like, well, he had a great team around him, right? Like Jalen Hurts feels like the Troy Aikman of his time. The question here with Jalen Hurts is like, does the level of success allow for the fact that Jalen Hurts is so much better than a lot of the guys that we named on this list? Like even like Jared Goff, he's a lot better than Jared Goff in my opinion. Like I think he has proven that he's better in big games than Jared Goff. And some people might say that doesn't matter, but I think that's one of the most important factors, right? Like if a quarterback is not good in the clutch, I don't care what kind of numbers you can put up. Like that quarterback has to be good in the clutch. So Jalen Hurts is a name that people throw out there. I just think Jalen Hurts is good at quarterback, though. Like, I don't think he is a particularly bad example of a quarterback. Like, I know that he has his moments where he looks so fucking iffy, but for the most part, in the big games, Jalen Hurts does tend to come through with the position. And I think that matters a ton. And I feel like people are just too low on Jalen Hurts in general. I think some people have a tendency to get too high on Jalen Hurts, which forces people to kind of push him off a pedestal. And that's why you constantly see all this arguing about Jalen. But I think Jalen is like a top 13 quarterback in the NFL. And I don't think that's like a particularly bad example of quarterback that you build around. I think that's pretty normal. Benji says Joe Flacco and Eli Manning. I will argue to the death that Eli Manning is the worst quarterback to make the Hall of Fame when he makes it. Or at least the worst quarterback in my era to have made the Hall of Fame. I will make that argument all the live long day. I think Eli Manning was not a good quarterback. Joe Flacco being in the argument for worst quarterback that a team is built around. Now, this is a pretty good one, right? Because Joe Flacco, I know that gets tricky when talking about Joe Flacco these days, because so many people who did not grow up watching Joe Flacco have opinions about Joe Flacco now. But Joe Flacco was never really considered better than like Andy Dalton during his day, other than the fact that he had playoff success and Andy Dalton didn't. But if we're talking about like year-to-year statistical success, Andy Dalton usually smoked him when it came to that kind of stuff. Again, goes back to the question we asked earlier, like how much does being clutch matter in a conversation about this? Because Joe Flacco certainly had that over Andy Dalton, who has one of the worst playoff records you could ever imagine a quarterback having for a guy who got to the playoffs as much as he did. But I think with Andy Dalton, I think somebody's going to probably bring up Andy Dalton in one of these. And Joe Flacco, the question is like, hey, how long these teams are building around Joe Flacco? Like, there's no debate. With Mark Sanchez, there's a little bit of a debate whether the Jets actually built around Mark Sanchez. With Joe Flacco, there's no debate. They 100% built around Joe Flacco, and they were successful with Joe Flacco. They even won a Super Bowl. So I can see Joe Flacco being a part of that conversation if we're talking about, hey, what's possible on the lower end of building around a quarterback. I think Joe Flacco is probably one of the better case scenarios when building around the lower end. Andy Dalton, of course, Andy Dalton pops up in this conversation. Andy Dalton, I would not call it successful because I don't think he reaches the criteria of success, right? When we're talking about successful, we're saying legitimate Super Bowl contenders getting to a Super Bowl or getting to multiple conference championship games. That happened with Joe Flacco. Obviously, Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl. With Mark Sanchez, obviously, Mark Sanchez got to 2 conference championship games. With Andy Dalton, he never won a playoff game. So I don't think you can say it was a success there. It felt like a failure. Now, statistically speaking, Andy Dalton was up there, but I don't think that the actual team success you had around him was really comparable. So after all of that input, I'm surprised that we didn't get like a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the worst quarterbacks that a team is successfully built around. And maybe that's because there's like a lot of Jimmy G stands out there. But Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, belongs on this list as well. Legitimately not a good quarterback. Brock Purdy, a 7th round pick, was able to not only replace him, but clearly outpace him as the quarterback for the 49ers. Like, I think Brock Purdy in his 3 years as a starter has clearly outpaced everything that Jimmy Garoppolo has been able to do as the quarterback for the 49ers. And we also know that for whatever reason, Kyle Shanahan seems to have easy job at replacing his quarterbacks more than like the average guy is able to do. So yeah, I don't see how Jimmy Garoppolo escaped this fade. I think Jimmy Garoppolo certainly should be in this conversation. But with all of the names that we talked about, I think there's 3 names I feel pretty solid about being in contention for the worst quarterbacks that teams have successfully built around. There's Mark Sanchez, there's Joe Flacco, and there's Jimmy Garoppolo. What are your thoughts about that and how you feel like that could possibly apply to the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation when we're talking about the absolute floor for success of building around? The guy has to be as good as Jimmy Garoppolo or Mark Sanchez at the worst end, or young Joe Flacco. I would also like to add here that it might feel like, oh man, finding a Joe Flacco isn't that hard, or finding a Mark Sanchez isn't that hard, or finding a Jimmy Garoppolo isn't that hard. And I think Kyle Shanahan makes it look that way when he can just pull Brock Purdy out of thin air. But look at how much time in between Mark Sanchez and the next best quarterback, the New York Jets, have gone. Like, obviously, even finding a guy the caliber of a Mark Sanchez isn't that easy. And there are a lot of people that people feel like are the caliber of a Mark Sanchez in the NFL that aren't the caliber of a Mark Sanchez, right? Like, I think there's a lot of overrating and underrating that goes on in this conversation. Even somebody like Jimmy Garoppolo, who I'm not a big fan of, there's a lot of quarterbacks out there today that if you ask a fan base, hey, is this guy as good as Jimmy Garoppolo? Fans would easily say, yeah, but the reality is that guy's nowhere near as good as Jimmy Garoppolo at the things that Jimmy Garoppolo was good at. Same thing with Joe Flacco, right? Like, people are like, oh yeah, all we got to do is find another Joe Flacco. But a lot easier said than done. Even Joe Flacco's don't grow on trees. So a lot to think about. Let me know what that makes you think about when it comes to the Browns quarterback situation. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.